All right, it is 10:02. We are going to get started this morning. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Jordan and I help facilitate paths to publication. Today we're going to get started. I know some of y'all it's the morning like us. We have people from all around the world though, and some of y'all it might be the evening. So whatever time it is, welcome. We're going to get started. This is our second Paths to Publication workshop of the spring semester. Paths to Publication is a professional development workshop that focuses on various topics, including publishing, writing, research and grants, and the graduate student experience. This platform provides distinguished guests opportunities to share their insights and expertise in hopes of moving us all forward in our own writing agenda and publications. These workshops are supported by the Education Leadership Research Center, directed by Dr. Beverly Irby, the Center for Research and Development in Language and Literacy Acquisition, directed by Dr. Laura Alessio, as well as the Graduate Student Advisory Council. If along the way you have questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll have a discussion at the end, as well as time to answer any questions y'all may have for our presenter. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend. And now I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Laura Sare. Laura Sare is a data librarian at the University Libraries here at Texas A&M. She specializes in census data and is the liaison to the Texas Data Repository, a research data management system of which Texas A&M is a member. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Laura. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today, and it's all yours.
Howdy, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Here in just a second. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing publishing data in the Texas Data Repository. Slide. Yes, thank you. So this is me. Oops, sorry. I am a birder and I collect data on birds, including sightings by county as well as audio files of bird songs. So I'm really into data and how to gather it correctly and make it openly accessible. So today I want to cover several things. I want to teach about what FAIR data is. I want to show you how to find a data repository. I want you to learn how to create a dataverse in the Texas Data Repository. I'm going to show you how to add a data set to your dataverse collection. And I'm going to demonstrate how to assign metadata to your data set. So first, I want to introduce you to FAIR data. FAIR data principles encourage researchers and other research stakeholders to ensure that research data are findable so that others can discover your data, accessible so that your data is available to others, interoperable so that your data can be integrated with other data or used by machines, and reusable so that your data can be used for new research. The Texas Data Repository depositing process can help you meet many of these principles. Texas A&M is a consortial member of the Texas Data Repository, and anyone affiliated with Texas A&M can deposit data if their data meets certain criteria. If your data does not meet the requirements, there are other data repositories you can choose from. This is a list of registries that have listings of data depositories. Also keep in mind that you want your data to be as visible as possible. So if your research discipline has a go-to repository, it would be best to use that rather than maybe the Texas Data Repository. Often a publisher or granting agency may tell you a repository they want you to use as a requirement for funding or publishing, that you have to publish your data. Often NIH grants require deposit in health topic specific NIH data repositories. But this webinar can still help you follow good practices to assist you in depositing your data in the Texas Data Repository or other repositories. So the Texas Data Repository is free, but note that some repositories have storage or hosting costs, and those should be considered if you are writing grants and you'll need money to store your data. Most repository restrictions center around data file sizes and if the data contains sensitive information. Some repositories require depositors to have their data reviewed or curated before it can be posted online. So if you have a deadline to post your data, don't wait to post it until the last minute if it has to go through a curation process. Other considerations when selecting a data repository include if you can embargo your data to meet requirements of a publisher, or if you have to publish your data with a manuscript. Also investigate that the repository you are selecting is legitimate. They may show an accreditation or certification and will be hosted by academic institutions, professional societies, or government agencies. So now that you know what a data repository is, let's talk about metadata, which you will be creating when you deposit your data to make it findable and accessible. Metadata is data about your data so that it can be understood by others. This includes basic information such as the title of your file data set, the meanings of variables and abbreviations, how and when data was collected, analyzed, or anything else that somebody should know if they want to reuse and understand your data. So you're already creating metadata in your everyday life. Say you take a selfie in front of Evan's library. In that case, your phone automatically creates metadata such as the GPS location, the date, the time, the file size, the file format, and information about your camera. Then if you post your photo onto social media, you may even add more metadata like a Twitter hashtag. This slide of cans with and without labels shows how metadata can be helpful to others. If we look at the can on the left, it has no label. We assume there's something in the can, but we don't know if it's food or paint or even glue. This is the equivalent of just handing somebody your data spreadsheet with no background information or metadata. In the middle photo, we can see the can's label has metadata that shows it is tomato soup, so we know it's an edible product. The label also includes metadata that shows the brand, the food type, the food flavor, and the size. But when you provide rich metadata, such as the label of the can on the right, there's information of the contents of the soup. So now I can decide if I want to eat this can of soup or not. If I look closely at the amount of sodium, I think I'll opt for a healthier version. By providing detailed metadata, you can help others decide if they want to use the data you've shared. Additionally, if you want to reuse your own data in the future, you don't have to try to remember how your data was collected and organized if you have good metadata documentation. A major metadata field is keywords. Keywords should be the main topic or subject of your data, but remember, there are often many words for the same thing. And for example, if someone is searching COVID-19 only, they may not find your data if you've only entered the keyword coronavirus. To help solve this problem, some disciplines have their own controlled vocabulary. This is a step beyond keywords because controlled vocabulary means you are using a preferred term with a set meaning. An example of this in biomed is the medical subject headings vocabulary system that the National Library of Medicine uses to index articles in PubMed. These standards set a common ground for people to further understand your data, because if you use a controlled vocabulary, people know what you mean with your terms, and then the data is more interoperable, which is one of those FAIR principles. An example is here in the United Nations Agricultural Thesaurus. We can see that the term corn has two different meanings depending on where you live. In America, what we call corn is maize, the yellow stuff that comes on the cob. While in Britain, they use the term corn for the crop that we call wheat. So if you were using corn as a keyword, you may want to add the term maize so that people know what crop item your data covers. So here at Texas A&M, researchers have access to deposit data into the Texas Data Repository. The link over here is at the top right. Note that this works best in the Chrome browser. Understand that because we provide permanent identifiers called DOIs for your data, there's always going to be a page on the internet for that DOI link. And so your data is going to be permanently posted. Once you've put it in a data repository, you cannot unpublish it or take it down. You can only provide a new version to it. The Texas Data Repository is for smaller sized data projects, and it is a great fit for depositing data to meet an article requirement, your thesis data, or to meet grant funding requirements. It can hold many types of data like spreadsheets and README files, and allows for different versions of data. Note that the purpose for posting your data in the Texas Data Repository is to make your data openly accessible to others. So you want to have a nice, clean files in your data set. This is not a storage area where you can store your data while analyzing it. This is where you're going to post a final clean version of your data. Also note the file sizes. The largest size is 4 gigabits, but sometimes people have trouble downloading data from the repository if it's greater than 2 gigabits if they're over a mobile connection. Also note that data sets need to be around 10 gigabytes total. Finally, the Texas Data Repository does not have a mechanism to host confidential or sensitive data. So for that type of data, or for very large file sizes, you will need to select a different depository like I showed earlier in this workshop. Obviously, you're going to deposit your data in the repository, but you can also deposit materials that can help others use and understand your data. For example, the code you use to create or analyze the data, a data dictionary that goes into detail about what the data covers, a README text that provides an outline of who collected the data, how it was collected, methods and software used, and other information, and maybe XML markdown files. Do consider that if you have sensitive data and you want to make your data publicly available, you may need to de-identify it. Or if you are working for a company, for example, your work is funded, in that case, you may not have rights to post the data. Also, some research communities have their own standards, and you'll want to include those as well, because someone from out your research community may want to use your data but is unfamiliar with your community data standards. So we recommend using data formats that anyone can access easily without contacting you for help. If you use open software rather than proprietary software, others don't have to purchase high-priced specialty software to read or use your data. Also realize that if you compress your files into a zip file, a lot of zip file extensions are proprietary and it may be hard for people to open them. Here we see a list of proprietary formats on the left and their open equivalencies on the right. So it's better to publish your data spreadsheet in the comma separated value form rather than in Excel. Also, by using open formats, you don't have to upgrade files. Like when I had to upgrade all of my bird records from the XLS extension to the XLSX extension to ensure that they continued to function properly. So a README file is a file that contains information about the files and documents surrounding your data set. They are usually in a text format for easy accessibility. I'm going to hope that this works. When I click this link, it's basically a template. And you just go along and you can fill in what is related to your data, like investigator, data collection dates, licensing, relationship between files, software and standards used, variables, any abbreviations. You don't have to fill all of them out, and you can add others, but this is just helpful to somebody who's looking at your spreadsheet to kind of give it context. So here at the libraries, we can help you with preparing your data for deposit. We can recommend formats, metadata text, and licensing options. We also have workshops that cover how to manage your data so that it's easier to meet those fair data principles and less work to deposit your data into the Texas Data Repository. The benefits of using the Texas Data Repository include version control. Published data sets are assigned a persistent identifier, that DOI, that can allow for easy citation. You can have access controls for different people to access different parts of your data. The metadata fields are customizable, and we provide for the long-term preservation of your uploaded data. This is an example of a file that's been deposited into, or a data set that's been deposited into the Texas Data Repository. Here, the researcher has posted some data about Texas bat habitat. In the blue box in the center, you can see that there is a citation generator with that DOI link, so that if somebody wants to use her data, they can cite her. On the right, you can see by the red arrow that her data has been downloaded 45 times. This shows the impact of this researcher's work and that other people are interested in their data. So for example, if this is their master's thesis data and they're applying for grad school, they could potentially use this as an indicator that their research is important on their applications because of the 45 downloads, and hopefully eventually they'll get cited. This is another way to use the TDR. This is data from a center here on campus. See how they have a main collection for their Feed the Future Innovation Lab, but then in the middle of the page, they have sub collections for each country that they have collected data in. So now I'm going to go into the training version of the Texas Data Repository to show how to create a Dataverse collection and add a data set. So I wanted to see, were there any quick questions before I start the next process?
Yeah, any questions we have on what she's covered so far, such as README text, or files or anything like that, or can we move on?
And I'll answer questions at the end too, if you think of
Yeah.
something.
As she goes, remember to pop it in the chat if you have a question, so that way at the end you can remember you want to ask it. So I think we're going to move to the next section now.
Okay. So hopefully you are seeing the Texas Data Repository screen. Great. So I'm going to log in. When you log in to that link I showed you on the slide, this is the training Dataverse. You can see up here where it says training, but you'll be taken to the actual Dataverse. And you'll have to log in through your A&M Net ID. So I'm logging into the training Dataverse. And now you can see at the top, it has my name, so I know I'm logged in. The first thing you need to do is find Texas A&M's logo. So for some reason, it's always at the end. So you can't add data until you get into the A&M Dataverse. So I'm going to click on the logo. And now at the top left, you can see the logo, and I know I'm in the right place. The first thing I'm going to do is up at the top here where it says add data. I'm going to click on that, and it says new Dataverse or new data set. So what we call a Dataverse is just a collection of all the documents and your data sets in one place. And you can have multiple Dataverses like that lab had for each African country that they had data for. So I'm going to click on new Dataverse. And it pre-fills out a lot of things. Everything with a little red asterisk, you have to fill out. So here for identifier, this is just a link to your Dataverse. So this is a workshop demo. A category, we're interested in seeing how people are using the repository. Researcher is the most common one, or if you might have a lab, or if you're doing this for a journal, that might be another popular one. So I'm just going to select researcher. It has my email, and I'm going to give a description. This is a workshop demo. So the next thing is metadata fields, and it's automatically checked on the standard metadata fields. So if you're not sure which ones you might need, just stick to the standard ones. It's plenty to mark up your data. If you have a specialty, like there's one for astronomy, there's one for geospatial metadata, some social sciences or humanities, you may want to select that instead. But again, you can always go back and add more metadata. So I'm going to go down to the bottom left and click on Create Dataverse. And I guess it's thinking, there it goes. So we see the green bar of success. So now you can see up at the top, I have my own Dataverse now. And it's within Texas A&M University, and it shows that it's unpublished. While things are unpublished, you can go in and change things and make edits, and nothing will happen because it's not published yet. But once it's published, when you edit anything after that, it comes up as a new version. So you want to make sure everything's clean and final, and so you don't have to create new versions for typos or things like that. So now I want to add a data set. So I go down here to the right where it says add data, and I click on New Data Set. And this is where the metadata that I discussed earlier comes in. So the data set that I want to add today is breeding bird survey data. So and it's already filled in my name and affiliation. I always recommend putting in your ORCID ID if you have one. It's very helpful for gathering all your scholarly outputs, and it just ties in all your research together. The point of contact, make sure that it's somebody that can answer questions about the data. And I'm going to add a description about the breeding bird survey data. Just going to copy and paste. I don't use this date field. It's not required, and there's better date fields later on. So subject is going to make you choose from a list. And since this is biology or a breeding bird survey, I'm going to choose earth and environmental science. I think that's the best fit. And now keywords. So my first keyword is going to be birds. And if I was using a controlled vocabulary like I talked about earlier, like if I was using mesh, I could put mesh here so that people would know what vocabulary I was using. And since there's multiple terms for birds, I'm going to add with this little plus sign on the right, the term ornithology. So that there's multiple entry points to find my data. And let's see, citation. I can add a citation that's related either like to an article that used the data or like your thesis or dissertation. And I'm going to move the URL into the URL slot. And notes, I'm just going to give a little background of how the survey was run, so people can quickly understand what kind of data. So the production date and location, I usually do today's date when I'm depositing. And then Texas A&M University. So now it says we're into the files and to select a file that you want to add. So I'm going to go grab my breeding bird survey data spreadsheet, and I'm going to drag it and drop it. So it's added one file. You can see I have it in the CSV format, so it's an open format. Over here on the right are some tags. So I'm going to click on the tags. And since this is my actual data, I'm going to click the data tag. If I was to put in my README file, I could select documentation so that when people come to look at my files, they can quickly look at the tags and decide which ones they want to look at first. So now you can see that I have the data tag. And if I want to add a description, I could say, a little more information about this particular file. So we filled out everything we can right now. So I'm going to save my data set. So I'm clicking Save Data Set, and it says something is missing. So we're going to scroll down, and it did not like my URL. So let's see what went wrong. So it kind of tells you, let's just go to this URL. If you've made an error. So now we're going to try again. Yay, so that I got the green bar of success. It's saying that my information is still in draft version. And you can see here that it says draft above the big blue bar and that my data set is also unpublished. So before I publish it, I want to add more metadata. You can see here, here's like my keywords that I added. So we have some metadata, but I want to add a little more. So I'm going to click on the metadata tab and it'll show at the right, add, edit metadata. So I'm going to click on that button. And there are other metadata fields now. So this is the USGS runs the breeding bird survey data. I'm going to scroll down, like language. I'm going to add that this is in English. Funding information. So if I had a grant, I could put the granting organization and maybe the grant ID number. And I like the time period dates. So the data started in 1969 and it ended for this spreadsheet in 2018. And data type is survey data. Software, I used Excel. I don't know what version. Any related material or related data sets I could add here. So now again, I filled out everything that I have to fill out and everything that I wanted to fill out. You don't have to fill out every single form. So now I'm going to save changes. And I think we're ready. So now I want to publish my data so that it'll be publicly available. So if you look over here on the right, you can see it says publish data set. So I'm going to click on that. And it says, I can't publish my data set until my Dataverse is also published. Do you want to publish both right now? And I'll say yes. So I'll say continue. And it's going to take a minute because it's having to publish both. So now the draft or unpublished boxes have gone away and I'm on version 1. And for terms right now, it defaults to, I've put my data into the public domain so that anybody can use it. But if you want to add conditions like people have to ask you for permission to use it in a commercial product, you can go here to edit the terms and requirements. And on versions, this is the first published version, but say I had to go back and do fix a typo, it would show that it would be version 1.1 and it would say the metadata typo was corrected. So that's just giving more information to people who want to use the data. So I'm going to stop, go back to my slideshow. And we have a lot of help to use the Texas Data Repository. This is the user guide, and I recommend you going through it before you deposit your data. We also have a video series on YouTube, which basically shows you in little segments of what I showed you today. If you forget a certain part and you don't want to watch this whole video all over again. And then we also have a metadata dictionary, which goes into way more detail about what those metadata fields mean. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you one thing. Let me go back to the. So if you aren't sure what a metadata field means, you can hover over the little blue question mark and it'll tell you background information so that you know how to fill out the field. Oops, went too fast. If you're interested in learning more about FAIR data, here are some links about FAIR data principles. And some final tips and reminders. Decide what kind of data you want to share. Sometimes you don't have to share everything. You can share portions of it or the portions that are not sensitive. Choose file formats that last, like those open file formats rather than proprietary. Remember to provide documentation in a README file. Consider ownership and privacy before you publish data online. Do you have the rights to post the data and you don't want to make somebody identifiable if you have like health information? And this link at the bottom is to our guides at the library that will give you more information about data management and repositories. So that's all I have for today. I guess we can start the question and answers.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Sare, for sharing that with us. I did collect a few questions. Let me scroll back up to where my question started. Okay, your first question is, can other countries access data in the Texas Data Repository, or how does that work exactly when it comes to access?
So the actual Texas Data Repository, anybody can access it.
Okay.
So I'll show. So this is the actual real one, not the practice one I was in.
Would you mind dropping that link in the chat?
Sure.
The website?
So here's my data that I submitted several years ago for an article that we wrote. And I'll copy the link.
Perfect.
And it's also on the slideshow.
Great. Now, another question is for Texas Data Repository. This doesn't have to be data collected from or about Texas. This is just a place for researchers in Texas to put their data, or can you elaborate a little more on the background of what it actually has within it?
It has a lot in it, everything you can imagine. So it doesn't have to be about Texas. For example, my data set is a national survey about forensic science information professionals. So that had nothing to do. I mean, I'm sure some people from Texas filled it out, but that wasn't the main point. And as you saw earlier, the lab, they had data from Africa.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of.
Could researchers all around the world deposit their data here too?
You have to be affiliated with Texas A&M.
Gotcha.
So if you're working with somebody at A&M that has a NetID and login, they can let you in and give you permission to work with their Dataverse. But if you're a researcher outside and you don't have access, the Harvard Dataverse, let me pull that up. It's the same software. But they have trying to get to the, so it's the same software that I used, but they allowed more people in. But it might cost money. I'm not sure what their levels. I think the bigger and more complicated your data is, they may start charging.
So I guess to clarify is anybody from anywhere in the world can use the data in the Texas data repository. They just can't publish it in there without a Texas A&M affiliation.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Let me see what other questions we have. Okay. Another question is, how do researchers check that the vocabulary they use for the keywords are controlled vocabulary when they deposit their data? Is there a list of controlled vocabulary for different research fields?
I don't know if there's an actual list. It's just something within your discipline. What I'll do education.
Okay.
Yeah, that's more cataloging. It's usually just something that you find out about as you move through your discipline. I don't like Bing. Let me get to Google.
So for example, like with the corn example, you would know that it's called different things because you research in agriculture and have experienced different terms, is what you're saying. It's kind of experiential knowledge.
Yes, and most disciplines have their own, like the thesaurus, like NASA has their own thesaurus. And the corn example I used was from the UN Agricultural Thesaurus.
Okay.
So within your discipline, there should be some kind of, like lawyers use Black Law's Dictionary, that once you say, I got this definition out of Black Law's Dictionary, people know it's going to mean something different than maybe in Webster's dictionary, or just the common definition.
Gotcha. So it's more discipline-based jargon, and you're knowing the research you're publishing. Like if I'm publishing on something, but it's going to have an international impact, or there's multiple countries in it, I need to consider what jargon other countries in my discipline may use instead of just the one I'm familiar with.
Right.
Okay.
Or you can just say, hey, when you list the controlled vocabulary source, this is the jargon I'm using, because it might be different for somebody else. Or what's great about sharing data is that people might use your data in ways you've never thought possible. So they're creating, in my bird studies, they're combining weather maps from NOAA with the eBird data, and they can map where migration is going to occur and say, okay, in Texas, there's going to be a high migratory count tonight because all of the migratory birds are going to be flying through, just based on the data, and they can map it out using NOAA. So it's different disciplines it's a way that different disciplines can talk to each other and use each other's information to create new products.
Very cool. And I had a question. Is there um, data repositories or, yeah, repositories like this that are just by default more internationally collaborative, like bigger ones you can think of that are more international oriented?
I think that at the moment, data repositories are pretty scattered.
Okay.
They're mostly at institutions. I know in Europe, some countries are trying to have a countrywide repository type system, like Texas. We did it for all of the institutions. It's available to all the institutions in Texas for the Texas Data Repository. But I think the best way to find information is, let's see. Let me go to my live guide. Is the Harvard Dataverse and the Texas Data Repository, they are all indexed by Google. And so Google has a special data set search. So I just looked up bat habitat data, and this is somebody from New Zealand. So
That's very cool. I had no idea that there was a data set Google kind of search function. I mean, it's only my second semester in my program, so I'm always blown away, apparently. But that's very cool to learn. Can you drop that link in the chat too? I'm gonna go ahead and bookmark it on my computer.
I'm gonna send my guide, the link to my guide, because
Perfect.
there's more. I really like the Google data set search, and then government data, and then GIS data. These are, I think, the three biggies. There you go.
Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and bookmark that for myself. Okay, let's see. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to drop in the chat? I think I've made it through all of the ones that were already listed thus far. Okay, we've got some nice words and accolades from our colleagues in Georgia. Thank you so much. We've got some more praise coming in. Any other questions?
And you can contact me from this guide as well, but I'll put my email in the chat.
Perfect.